What's up, everyone? This is Noa Dalzell, and I'm here with another episode of WNBA Today on CLNS Media, reacting to Cathy Engelbert's 25-minute press conference ahead of Game 1 of the WNBA Finals, which touched on a lot of different things, but honestly didn't go super deep and into any one topic, which was a little bit of a bummer because there's just a lot going on right now, obviously, with the leadership and the Connecticut Sun and CBA negotiations and Napheesa Collier's comments and a whole bunch of things that just wasn't going to be fully addressed in a 25-minute presser. But we did get a little bit of insight into some things that have been hot topics this week, namely Cathy Engelbert's supposed comments per Napheesa Collier relating to both Caitlin Clark, who she allegedly said should be very grateful for the league and that she wouldn't be able to have made the $16 million off the court without the WNBA, and then also that players should be on their lucky stars thanking Cathy for the media rights deal that she negotiated. Both of those comments made headwaves after Napheesa, shared them to the media in her exit interview earlier this week. And I think that was the number one thing that was on everybody's mind when it came down to talking to Cathy before Game 1 in Las Vegas. And Malika Andrews begins the press conference by straight up asking Cathy about that comment about the players should be on their knees thanking their lucky stars. And the way that she answered that question, she deflected. She talked about how it's been a really hard week and about how there's been a lot of inaccuracies in social media and reporting. But she didn't deny that. And so my takeaway from that comment was that she did in fact say that to Napheesa. And then there's the other comment that I think probably got even more attention, and that was the comment about Caitlin Clark and Caitlin Clark's success kind of being because of the WNBA and that she should be grateful for it. And Annie Costabile of Front Office Sports asked um, Cathy about those remarks, and those she outright denied, which is interesting because I don't know why Napheesa would make that up or lie about that, and I find that hard to believe. But then at the same time, we've seen Cathy kind of just avoid answering a question, and so the fact that she outright denied that one was a little bit surprising, honestly. And I don't really know what to make of it. But that was kind of her comments on what Napheesa said, and she did say that Napheesa was going to be, they've been texting a little bit, and that they're going to meet next week, and that she's had conversations with players and all that. But what stood out to me is that as much as she was trying to kind of paint this picture from behind the scenes, we're all having conversation, and behind the scenes, things are kind of better than they seem, maybe, because obviously we're seeing all these players on social media kind of coming at Cathy and aligning themselves with Napheesa. We know that she didn't reach out to Caitlin because Caitlin did her exit interview a couple of days ago, and she was asked if Cathy had reached out to her since Napheesa's remarks, and she hadn't. And so I wasn't really buying the narrative that like behind closed doors there was a lot of good dialogue happening, because you would think that if you didn't say that, you didn't make the remarks about Caitlin Clark kind of owing her success and her off-court deals to the WNBA, that the second that that comes out, you would reach out to Caitlin and make that clear. And so I'm not in the business of being like, who's lying? I don't know. Obviously, somebody is, either Cathy or Napheesa. If I had to go with my gut, I probably don't think Napheesa made that up. There's no reason to really think that, whereas obviously Cathy's on the hot seat here. But the more important thing than the semantics of like, maybe she twisted her words a little, or maybe Cathy now doesn't remember it exactly. I don't know. Obviously, it was a private conversation that I don't think we're ever going to find out for sure. There's not a recording of it somewhere or anything like that. But the more important thing is that the trust is completely eroded now between the players and the leadership of the WNBA. And so that my takeaway from the press conference is that that seems irreparable. And she can say the right things, and she's been in business, as she mentioned, for 40 years, and that she hasn't shied away from hard moments. And obviously, she was CEO of Deloitte. Like, this is not the first time that she's been in a position of leadership and had to deal with a sticky situation. But at the same time, the number one thing that I think she doesn't have is respect and buy-in from the players. And when we talk about coaching in the NBA and in the WNBA, and I'm asked to evaluate, like, is this a good coach, or like, should this guy be extended, or should she be extended and signed long term, I always say we're not in the film room, we're not in the locker room, we have a limited understanding of what's actually going on. And my biggest measure for whether or not a coach or a person in leadership in an organization should be evaluated as like successful is if they have buy-in from the players, because ultimately For example, I covered the Celtics, and like Joe Mazzulla, he's been on the hot seat for coaching multiple times throughout his 3-year tenure, but he's really never lost the faith of his players. And so I can always gauge that. And when people ask me, what do you think about Joe Mazzulla as a coach? I kind of go off of what the players have said. And so I think with Cathy right now, obviously it's a little bit different because she doesn't represent the players. She represents ownership in the league. But the fact of the matter is that nobody has come to her defense since this whole dialogue started. Sophie Cunningham on her podcast talked about how the league is not even really engaging with the players on CBA negotiations. So it's not just the fact that they haven't reached an agreement. They don't even feel like they're being heard and they're being listened to. And the reality is that there are diehard Napheesa Collier fans, there are diehard Caitlin Clark fans, there are diehard Sophie Cunningham fans, but there are not diehard Cathy Engelbert fans because she's not a basketball player. She's a person, she's a business person, And so I think the league maybe has lost sight of that, where the power lies with the players. Maybe things were different in the past when the players didn't have the same level of visibility and popularity than they have now. But today, the power lies with the players. And it's not just one or two players, it's a whole bunch of players. And if they're united, that's a ton of power. And we've already seen that they've started their own league in the offseason and how successful that's been. And I think, that could be the beginning of more things if this doesn't take off. I know this is kind of a ridiculous thing to say, but I've seen people say like Caitlin Clark could start her own basketball league and like people would watch that, but it's true. Like they really would. And so her name and her brand and her voice and her power like is enormous. And so I'm surprised to hear that the league has been kind of playing hardball with the players to the extent that they have. And Cathy talked quite a bit yesterday about how the long-term success and sustainability of the league is the most important thing, and they want the players to get as much revenue as possible. They want the players to come back and you know be better compensated for their efforts, and their current pay is actually ridiculous. And regardless of what happens, their pay is going to balloon because no WNBA number one pick is going to make $70,000 a year in 5 years. Like, it just makes no sense. Juju Watkins is not coming into that WNBA. There will literally be another league before that happens, in my opinion. So all of that is the reality of kind of the situation right now. And so I get Cathy's, concerns about long-term viability, and this boom only started a couple of years ago. So, I can see how from a business standpoint, you want to ensure that the revenue projections are what they are. And there's a bunch of new expansion teams coming into the fold. There's going to be 18 teams by the end of the decade, as she mentioned yesterday. But the reality is that the league, in my opinion, is not the stakeholder with the most power right now. It is the players. The most powerful person in women's basketball is Caitlin Clark, and the number two most powerful person is probably Angel Reese. And you just go down the list from there, and it's all players. And I don't know where Cathy Engelbert ranks, but she's not one of the most powerful people in this business right now. And the media rights deal, like, there are some good things about it. There are some bad things about it. Certainly, it's a good start for the WNBA. But I don't think players should be on their lucky stars, Cathy. And she certainly shouldn't be talking like that to players in leadership. And yes, it was a private conversation, but what I've said before, and I'll say it again, this wasn't a private conversation between her and her kids that was wiretapped. This was a conversation she was having with a player that she's in active negotiations with. And so there's a different level of like, she really felt comfortable saying that. And so I honestly had like mixed feelings leaving this press conference because we didn't get a lot of answers to things that mattered. On the Connecticut Sun piece, which is a storyline that I'm very invested in as somebody who covers basketball in Boston, she made it sound like it was all in the tribe's control, and that the tribe was just mulling over their offers and business decisions, and that they'll do what they need to do. And she basically rejected this notion that the WNBA has a hand in telling the tribe what to do, which obviously there's been a ton of reporting indicating that. So had the press conference been 10 minutes on that topic, I would have loved to hear what Cathy had to say about the fact of the matter is that like the tribe agreed to a deal with Steve Pagliuca, the current former minority owner for the Celtics, and that reportedly the league and the board of governors rejected that deal. So they did not get into the weeds on that, but that was another issue that was touched upon. They didn't get into the incoming expansion drafts from Portland and Toronto, largely because there are more pressing matters right now, such as a potential lockout. So there's a lot on that side as well. But a lockout, I think everybody agrees, would be a terrible thing right now for the WNBA because they are in such a moment of immense growth. in the popularity, viewership, jersey sales, ticket sales, everything's really at a high. And so you don't want to stunt that growth, especially right now. But at the same time, the players are not going to settle for another long-term deal that doesn't pay them accordingly. And I think that's the number one thing. So I don't know what to make of like the exact comments that Cathy made. I think the general sentiment, regardless of the exact verbiage, is that she thinks that the success of the league is more attributed to her than some of the players. And that she doesn't view the players as peers that she needs to have like a true human relationship with. And that's the fundamental problem. And I think Adam Silver on the NBA side has done a better job of that with the NBA players. And in her exit interview, Caitlin Clark was asked about like what makes a great leader, and she basically said, regardless of whether it's in business or in the world or in basketball, it's like the human relationship side, and that's the side that we know Cathy has struggled with. And she doesn't reach out to players after they have injuries. She doesn't reach out to players when they retire, as Elena Del Don reminded us in her Instagram story earlier this week. She just lacks that piece, that like soft skill of just being able to connect with people. And in active negotiations when tensions are already high and players have been underpaid for a long time, like if you're somebody like Dewana Bonner, who's been in this league for a long time, like you have been underpaid your entire career and you've had to play multiple leagues just to get earn a livable wage. So I totally understand like how years of frustration have built up and you have never really felt respected by the leadership of the league, and now you're seeing that like Liberty courtside tickets have skyrocketed, and like clearly ownership groups across the league are making a lot of money and teams are being valued at exorbitant prices. And the Connecticut Sun are up for sale for $325 million, yet the players' entire payroll is a $1.5 million salary cap. So the $1.5 million salary cap, like I think the average person doesn't realize that that's the reality and just like how ridiculous that is, and what it means for even ownership groups that want to pay more. Like that's the cap. And so I think the it's been such an issue for so long now, and especially the last few years, seeing the amount of revenue that players like Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese and Paige Beckers and Sabrina Ionescu and others have brought into the WNBA, Asia Wilson, and yet they are so undercompensated. Like it's a problem. And yes, those players are the ones that are going to be fine financially because of their off-court deals, but there's a lot of other players that don't have that visibility if they play for smaller franchises. They don't have the fame levels, and like they're part of this league now that they're not getting equal compensation, and the ownership groups meanwhile are enjoying valuations. Like the Connecticut Sun have put very little into their franchise in recent years, and yet they're about to sell a team for $325 million. So or somewhere in that ballpark, but depending on what ends up happening. So I guess I would say my ultimate reaction to Cathy is that regardless of like the minutia, and I don't know exactly if more details are going to come out, if Napheesa is going to respond and further clarify those comments, or if any other players are going to get involved. It seems like the players really stand behind Napheesa, so I haven't seen anybody really waver from that. Only the Phoenix Mercury really haven't wanted to comment on this topic, which I understand. They're in the finals, and the optics too of like it came right after they eliminated the Lynx. Like I can see how that team has decided to just like take a second from it, and I would imagine that when the finals end, they'll be more vocal as well. But like that's kind of where we're at right now, and so I'm not really overly concerned with the details because the general sentiment that you could sense, both from all the online reaction and all the players doubling down and posting on their Instagram story about Cathy being kind of the worst leader and the WNBA having the best fans with the worst leadership, like that seems to persist. And so I guess, maybe the Caitlin Clark comments were mischaracterized. I don't know. I tend to think Napheesa didn't make them up, but the fact that she didn't reach out to Caitlin Clark in the last week, like further kind of affirms that inability to like just connect on a human level. And like if it was an unfair thing to say, then and if it was not inaccurate, like wouldn't that be your first call? So I don't know. The whole saga is so weird. It's unfortunate that it's overshadowing the finals right now, and I would say that it has overshadowed the WNBA finals. So I have a video on the WNBA finals game 1 recap as well. So want to make sure that this storyline doesn't kind of interfere with that coverage. But ultimately, I think that this is the moment and this is the long-term storyline that honestly will have more implications in this final series because this could kind of change the future of this league. So we'll have more coverage on WNBA Today on CLNS. Leave a comment, leave a like, leave a subscribe, tell your friends. We'll have live reactions or instant reactions as news continues to break all year long. So thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed and enjoy the rest of your week.